Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: the U.S. arm of a Chinese battery maker said to establish a plant near a military facility in Michigan. Now its parent company is working closer with a Chinese university tied to Beijing's military. China slapped sanctions on 13 U.S. defense firms over recent arms sales to Taiwan. The regime warns Washington not to cross what it calls its first red line. A defiant Taiwan says it won't bow down to totalitarianism. We're on the Taiwanese president's message during a visit to Guam. And as the deadline for the National Defense Authorization Act approaches, lawmakers are expected to include legislation to counter the Chinese Communist Party. A Chinese company with a foothold in Michigan, bolstering its ties with a university tied to the Chinese military. The Chinese company is on track to set up a production plant less than 90 miles from a military training facility in the Wolverine state. Chinese battery maker Goshen High-Tech signed an agreement with Tsinghua University before Thanksgiving. The two have pledged to work on next-generation battery technology. Goshen's U.S. subsidiary is in the process of building a battery plant in Michigan. The plant site is 88 miles from Camp Grayling, a military training facility. President-elect Trump said he's 100% opposed to the Goshen plant deal. This August, he wrote on Truth Social, saying the Goshen plant would, quote, put Michiganders under the thumb of the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing. Tsinghua University is Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping's alma mater. It's funded by the Chinese military, works on defense research, and trains talent for China's nuclear weapons program. Goshen has sparked alarms in Washington. Lawmakers have banned the Pentagon from buying batteries made by Goshen and a few other Chinese companies starting in 2027. Worth noting, Goshen's Chinese parent company has a Communist Party cell operating inside it. The parent company also hired over 900 Communist Party members, including its CEO. The Chinese parent company has full control over Goshen. Goshen's U.S.-based subsidiary is set to receive over $700 million in tax subsidies for its Michigan plant. Congressman John Molinar is the chairman of the House Select China Committee. He also represents Michigan's 2nd Congressional District. Posting on X, Molinar wrote that until Goshen is driven out of Michigan, the state's security, elections, and auto supply chains, quote, will remain vulnerable to CCP influence. Entity has reached out to Goshen for comment but did not hear back before airtime. The White House is warning that a China-backed hacking campaign has impacted dozens of countries around the world. Officials Wednesday said at least 8 U.S. telecom firms were caught in the attack.
The campaign, titled Salt Typhoon, is reportedly compromising telecom infrastructure worldwide. On the receiving end of this breach are companies like Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. Prior to the election, reports suggest the hacking group also targeted calls and text messages from President-elect Trump and his then running mate J.D. Vance. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Mark Warner called it the, quote, the worst telecom hack in our nation's history.
From the battlefield to cyberspace, adversaries are evolving their arsenal. With the growing threat of Chinese espionage in U.S. networks, is America ready for this new tech-driven hybrid warfare? To discuss, we sat down with Rex Lee, security advisor at MySmart Privacy. Rex Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show, Tiffany.
We are seeing, of course, right now the tensions in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war, where it might go nuclear. We're seeing Iran in the Middle East, those tensions over there, and of course China in Asia. Given all of that,
Right.
Any talk about how these adversaries might be employing AI or even quantum in terms of targeting our infrastructure?
My concern is that the Chinese government, the fact that Chinese researchers said they can break RSA encryption standards in less than 8 hours using a quantum computer, which the tech community called foul on and said, oh, there's no way these researchers could do it. But MIT took it seriously. Their researchers actually broke the RSA encryption standards in less than 8 hours with a quantum computer at the level quantum computing is at today, which is in its infantile stages. So that's highly concerning. So when you look at the fact that you can now then layer AI over that capability, the Byte Spider web crawler might be an example because it's scraping the internet faster than any technology out there and nobody can figure it out yet. I'm sure there's some technologists out there who probably have the same theories that I have about it. They're just not going to go public with it.
And given what you just touched on there, is our utility broadband or even, critical infrastructure prepared for this type of a tech-based hybrid warfare?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. I'm going to tell you right now, absolutely not. I mean, if you go back in any other year, we've never seen anything like this. It started in February with AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. This is another threat posed by tech and telecom centralization. Then over the summer, we saw CrowdStrike, where a choke point that has to do with a kernel in an operating system supposedly was going to get updated on a Friday. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've been working in tech and telecom since 1983. Nobody out there does any software upgrades on a Friday before a busy weekend. That just doesn't happen in the tech industry. So you have these choke points out there where they can be exploited to take down internet trade and commerce, take down all three of our major cellular phone networks, and take down TV, mass communications, all at the same time. So you can imagine if somebody were to strategize an attack on comms, because in major warfare, like let's say the start of World War IV, or I consider the Cold War as World War III, but if the next World War were to start and two superpowers were going to hit each other, the first thing you take down is comms and mass communications, and that can be done through these choke points.
Rex Lee, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
China on Thursday warned Washington not to cross its first red line, a reference to the issue of Taiwanese independence. That's after Taiwan said its President William Lai spoke with U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson over the phone. Here's what happened.
Taiwan's presidential office said Lai called Johnson during his Pacific trip, but did not give details. The Chinese Foreign Ministry announced sanctions on 13 U.S. defense firms, plus 6 company executives. The ministry said that's in response to the recent $385 million arms sale Washington approved to Taiwan. Washington does not recognize Taiwan as an independent country, but it's bound by law to provide the island with weapons to defend itself. Beijing's ruling body, the Chinese Communist Party, has never ruled Taiwan, but claims that Taiwan, as part of China, a stance Taiwan's government rejects.
Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te had a defiant message for Communist China today while in the U.S. territory of Guam. He said the island nation will not bow down to totalitarianism, describing Taiwan and the U.S. as, quote, brothers. Take a listen.
Moving forward, let us continue to work together to deepen cooperative relations between Taiwan and Guam, and let us together become the crucial force in defending freedom, democracy in the First Island chain.
Lai is in Guam, a major U.S. military base, on what is officially only a one-night stopover. This is part of a tour of 3 Pacific Island countries which maintain formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan. China has condemned the U.S. for allowing his transit stops, which included 2 days in Hawaii at the start of the trip. Lai addressed members of the overseas Taiwanese community, saying Taiwan's path from the darkness of dictatorship to democracy was hard fought. Lai will leave for Palau later today before returning to Taiwan tomorrow.
Moving on to Capitol Hill, Congress is expected to vote on the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2025 before December 20th. This year's NDAA is expected to include legislation to counter the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party worldwide. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
It is expected that later this week, congressional leaders will unveil their agreement for the NDAA for fiscal year 2025. And it's also expected that a slew of nearly 70 bills that have already passed on the House floor and that are meant to counter the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party worldwide will be attached to the NDAA for fiscal year 2025.
This cannot continue. You can't continue to do business with the Communist Chinese Party and not knowing, not realizing that there's concentration camps in China where they forcibly harvest, they cut out the organs of the people that they're incarcerating. Yes, we want to say something. This is unacceptable. You must stop it. You must be held accountable for these atrocities.
That was Republican Congressman Scott Perry from Pennsylvania discussing the Falun Gong Protection Act, a bill that is expected to be attached to this year's National Defense Authorization Act alongside the Biosecure Act and other bills designed to counter China in the realms of AI, military capabilities, and critical infrastructure.
In July of this year, the Bipartisan Commission on the National Defense Strategy published its final report. The commission finds that in many ways, China is outpacing the United States and has largely negated the U.S. military advantage in the Western Pacific through 2 decades of focused military investment.
The National Defense Authorization Act of fiscal year 2025 will authorize the spending of nearly $1 trillion in government spending. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Coming up, South Korea's ruling party vows to oppose impeachment efforts against the president after he imposed short-lived martial law. What could happen if he's forced out of office? New York-based Shen Performing Arts has a warning for all Americans. It concerns the threat the Chinese Communist Party has over American businesses and news media.
We are in the midst of a very determined, unprecedented anti-Falun Gong campaign right here in America on U.S. soil.
And Chinese online retailers Temu and Shen suspend their operations in Vietnam. They say they are working on getting approval for their e-commerce services from the country's authorities. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. South Korea's ruling party says it won't back the opposition party's push to impeach President Yoon Suk-yeol. On Thursday, Yoon replaced his defense minister as both face impeachment over a short-lived attempt to impose martial law. Yoon said his initial decision was to root out what he called destabilizing communist forces. Here's the story.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is now set to face an impeachment vote in parliament this weekend. On Tuesday, Yoon made a botched attempt to implement martial law, with parliament lifting the order only hours later. But that wasn't before a chaotic night that saw armed troops deploy near the National Assembly and clash with lawmakers. On Thursday, the country's opposition Democratic Party said they'll put up a vote Saturday evening over whether to impeach Yoon. The opposition needs at least 8 ruling party votes to pass the bill. His ruling party is divided, but has said it will oppose impeachment. If the bill passes, South Korea's constitutional court will decide on impeachment in up to 180 days. Also on Thursday, Yoon accepted the resignation of Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun. Kim had recommended Yoon declare martial law on Tuesday, according to the Interior Minister, a senior military official, and the filing to impeach Yoon by opposition members. In a parliament hearing Thursday, Vice Defense Minister Kim Seon-ho said that his former boss had also ordered the deployment of troops. The vice minister also said he had been unaware of the martial law order until Yoon announced it. The martial law plan sought to ban political activity and censor the media. It sparked public anger in South Korea's streets and set off international concern. Yoon has been seen by Western leaders as a partner in the U.S.-led effort to counter rising authoritarianism. On Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said he had not been informed about Yoon's plans in advance, while his deputy called it a serious mistake.
Shen is the world-class performing arts company based in New York State. Now, the arts company says it's under attack by the Chinese regime right here on U.S. soil. The arts group says what's happening to it should serve as a warning to all Americans. For full transparency, NTD is a media sponsor of Shen.
New York-based Shen Performing Arts has a warning for all Americans. It says the Chinese Communist Party wants to control American businesses and news media, and that if Americans can't recognize this, they'll be unable to stop it. Shen is an elite dance company that has been targeted by the Chinese regime for almost 20 years. Shen says a lawsuit just filed against it by a former dancer is part of the Chinese regime's long-standing campaign. The arts group added that a series of negative media reports that it called one-sided and deeply flawed came out just before and after the lawsuit and helped bolster the attack by giving the suit greater prominence.
This is all the same points, this is all the same tactic. It's now just being delivered here right in the United States on U.S. soil.
In a press release, Shen said that the woman behind the suit now works with a Chinese government entity. In her filing, the woman denies working for the regime, but Shen says her narrative parrots the Chinese Communist Party's campaign to cancel Shen. Last month, a Chinese communist agent was sentenced to prison in New York for trying to bribe an IRS official. The agent's goal was to get Shen non-profit status revoked. Another man was recently convicted for collecting intelligence on Falun Gong practitioners here in the United States. Falun Gong is a spiritual discipline practiced by many of Shen performers.
We are in the midst of a very determined, unprecedented anti-Falun Gong campaign right here in America on U.S. soil.
Since the 1940s, the CCP has systematically destroyed traditional Chinese culture so that it can indoctrinate its people with communism. Because Falun Gong and Shen are rooted in traditional Chinese culture, the CCP sees them as a threat. So the regime has tried to block and cancel Shen since its founding in 2006. The regime has threatened theaters, pressured elected officials, made bomb threats, and even slashed the tires of Shen buses. But Shen says despite 2 decades of threats and attacks, including in the media and via lawfare, it remains steadfast in its mission to showcase the beauty, majesty, and spirituality of China's 5,000-year-old civilization.
And you can watch a full exclusive interview with Levi Browdy of the Falun Dafa Information Center, Shen Vice President Ying Chen, and me this Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern on NTD. Don't miss it. How should Washington deter a future war with China? The House Committee on the Chinese Communist Party says strengthening America's defense industrial base is crucial. This includes boosting domestic production and cutting reliance on China for imported military parts. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
The bipartisan House Committee on the Chinese Communist Party says the U.S. needs to make immediate changes in order to prevent a future hot war with China. Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy says that recent polling shows a majority of voters think there's a 50-50 chance of a war with China within the next 10 years.
From the same study, we see that almost 80% of voters believe we should do everything we can in our power to prevent war with China.
The committee says it's imperative that America strengthen its defense industrial base and workforce.
That our defense industrial base lacks the capacity to deter and win a fight with the PRC.
Congressman Krishnamurthy says that the U.S. relies on China for many essential components and materials for military use. He says, for example, 3 minerals, gallium, antimony, and germanium, which are used in many weapons systems.
Just 2 days ago, the CCP, maybe noticing this very chart, announced it was banning exports to the U.S. of, you guessed it, gallium, antimony, and germanium. GAG, it makes me gag.
The committee also brought in experts to make suggestions.
What is now required is no less than a complete restructuring of the processes, incentives, and culture behind our defense requirements, acquisition, contracting, budgeting, and technology control systems.
If such a conflict were to occur, we may be ready for day 1, but we are utterly unprepared for day 30, let alone day 300. America and our allies need to rebuild the arsenal of democracy, and that is achievable, but only if we adopt a fundamentally new approach to how we define, design, and produce military power.
The committee says in the past, hostile leaders made aggressive moves when America was close to similar situations related to defense production. Reporting on Capitol Hill, Jason Blair, NTD News.
President Biden has just concluded his trip to Africa. Before he left, he expressed hope that President-elect Trump would build on his investments in the continent. Here's more.
At the center of these is the Lobito Corridor project in Angola. Biden began the investment project last year to reduce Africa's dependence on China. The railway corridor connects the mineral-rich heartland to the Atlantic coast. Biden explained that cargo that used to take 45 days to reach the U.S. will eventually take less than 45 hours. The White House says the U.S. has poured nearly $4 billion into the Lobito corridor. An official with the Biden administration said they believe the Trump administration will continue the project for America's national and economic security.
Once a profit engine, General Motors' China division is now losing money. The Detroit automaker is expected to take a more than $5 billion hit on its China operations. Back in September, CEO Mary Barrow noted that very few car makers are turning a profit in China, adding the pricing war there is becoming, quote, a race to the bottom. For foreign car makers, the Chinese market has been shrinking. In July, just over 30% of auto sales in China were from foreign car makers. U.S. automakers saw their sales in China almost cut in half, from $4 million in 2017 down to $2 million last year. Chinese online retailers Temu and Shen have suspended their operations in Vietnam. Both companies said today they are working to register their e-commerce services with the nation's authorities. The Vietnamese government and businesses have voiced concerns over the impact of discount Chinese online platforms. They have also expressed worries about the potential sale of counterfeit goods. Vietnam's trade ministry said today it ordered Temu to suspend operations in the country after it missed the business registration deadline. Temu said it submitted all documents required to register. It wasn't clear if authorities also halted Shen's operations, but its Vietnamese website was unavailable. The company said it was working with the trade minister to register services. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.